This is Yasmin Benoit. Yasmin is a British model, asexual and aromantic activist, a writer, speaker, consultant, and researcher at Stonewall. So, you know, multi-hyphenate woman who has many hats. Yasmin has been described as the unlikely face of asexuality by Cosmopolitan magazine, and she quickly became a leading voice for the community after publicly coming out in 2017. She's currently amassed over 74,000 followers on Instagram, where she continues to educate people on asexuality and aromanticism. And some of the initiatives she started include the This Is What Asexual Looks Like movement, which was aimed at diversifying asexual visibility. She also co-founded the International Asexuality Day, which is coming up on April 6th. And she won Campaigner of the Year at the Rainbow Honors Awards in 2022 and was the first asexual Grand Marshal at NYC Pride in 2023. She also partnered with Stonewall to release the UK's first report on asexual experiences. So I'm very honored to have her here speaking with us today. Yeah, thank you, welcome. You can introduce yourself, say anything else that I've left out, and contextualize yourself in the conversation, yeah.
I think you covered it all pretty well. Yeah. I did do those things. And and it's great to be here as part of this conversation. I think that speaking about representation and kind of ending up being representation has kind of become pretty central to my work, and also it's kind of rare to have the opportunity to speak to another Black person about it, and also to kind of get to have a intersectional approach to these conversations, and that being the main topic as opposed to a little thing thrown in at the end. So exactly. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So the entire premise of this, I'm obviously a film buff. I love films. That's why we're here. So I'm just quite interested in, all my life I've been looking at, who is presented on TV and film as being asexual. So I just came up with a few asexual characters. So I'm who would we put in the asexual canon? So here they are. That's Todd in the middle, who I think is quite a big one. This is Rafael Santiago from Shadowhunters. There's Liv, as was mentioned. We have Isaac right here. And then that is Florence from Sex Education. And then Jughead Jones is up there. So Jughead Jones from the Archie comics. In the comic books, Jughead was always asexual. But when he was put in the Riverdale TV series, he was made heterosexual. His asexuality was essentially erased. And then there's Florence, who is, I don't know that I would say asexual canon, but it's someone who I notice her asexuality, but Florence was kind of given small episode, as is asexual characters are given oh my gosh, this is your storyline, this is your episode of you discovering your asexuality, and it's a throwaway episode. Todd has had one of the longest running developments, lines about being asexual, multiple seasons. That's kind of why I like Todd. And he was much more than his asexuality, I feel. But yeah, this is kind of what I would think of when you speak of the asexual canon. There's obviously so many more characters, but there's also some which is quite interesting, SpongeBob was recently
yeah, SpongeBob was actually one of the OGs. That was 2004.
Exactly. Yeah,
that. Just in case you ever wondered about
I know,
what
right?
SpongeBob was doing in his pineapple.
Yeah. Exactly. So this is kind of what you'd see as what would be the asexual canon. And if you look at it, all the characters are white. Most of the characters on here are male. And then I was just trying to think about who is not straight, who is female, who is a POC asexual character. And recently we speak about, who is on Sex Education. We have over here who is Elijah, who is from Big Mouth. I actually don't watch Big Mouth, but I remember going to specifically look for that episode because I was who is this introduction, who is asexual? And they were Black as well. So I was that's quite cool. That's something I've not seen before. And then we have here Cash from Heartbreak High. I have Cash on there because Cash is queer. That's also another aspect. Many asexual characters who are represented are usually in straight relationships. So I have Cash on there. And then this is a film called I Am What I Am. It's a Japanese film. So these are some of the few queer and asexual characters and asexual characters of color. So in comparison to what the other canon is, people wouldn't go to these characters or name them initially. And that's I wanted to present this so people can see, like, what do people think of as asexual? We're not going to go to people who look like this, or people who, like me and Yasmin, people who dress in a certain way. And I guess that's what we're here to kind of discuss. Why some people are considered to be asexual, why others are not considered to be asexual. At the beginning, I think we had mentioned that Yasmin was labeled the unlikely face of asexuality, and we're kind of here to discuss why is that. Can you tell us a bit about how you feel about being deemed the unlikely face of asexuality?
I mean, being the face of anything is sort of unusual. Like, it's not like on your to-do list.
Yeah.
Of things. It's quite like a heavy weight to have. But the unlikely part actually for me kind of rang very true, which is kind of one of the reasons why I didn't see it coming or didn't mention asexuality sooner and spent most of my life avoiding the topic like a plague, only for it to become the thing I'm known for for talking about, ironically. Because yeah, I didn't see it coming because I looked at all of the examples of representation, not just in the media, but online, the people that got interviewed for articles and for documentaries and going into ace spaces and seeing everyone looking not like me. And yeah, so I always sort of felt like the odd one out, and it's kind of like you can't really avoid it in the media landscape. Like, I stick out like a sore thumb. So I think, yeah, I think a lot of people sort of react to me in a certain way because they're like, this isn't what I expected. This isn't what we were picturing.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess a huge part of that, which I see online as well, is your work. You're a model. You model in lingerie, and people are like, no, you can't be asexual in doing that. And that's part of with the representation. I think we saw a lot of the characters are teenagers. A lot of the characters would be seen as, oh, this is a person who's socially awkward. Maybe they dress a certain way. And I guess that's part of like the work you're doing. Like, people wouldn't, apart from like your race, your personality, how you dress, how you look, that's also other factors, I suppose. And also age-wise, a lot of them are quite young, the characters.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like kind of race definitely came first, and then it was only later on when people were like using my appearance, like clothing-wise, as more of an excuse, because you know, for a long, I mean, I was a teenager once, and and I was a pretty awkward one, and I would tick all of the stereotypical boxes, and people didn't believe me then either. So I think that, and that was mainly because of my race rather than my style. It wasn't until I got older where people kind of use that as an excuse, but I do feel like it still kind of boils back to other elements.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I guess this is part of, like, you started the "this is what asexual like looks like" hashtag. I remember I found this and then I traced it back to you because I was also like, I found this and I was like, yeah, like, can we have more diversity, please? Because I also, when I was looking for stuff at first, I went on YouTube, as one does, to go and look like, and specifically my searches were like Black asexual, because I needed to see someone else like who looks like me speaking about that. Can you please speak about like starting this movement, what that was like, the reach of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people see it and assume that I'm specifically talking about, oh, you can be asexual and be hot. And it's kind of just been like dumbed down to just that, which wasn't really the actual premise. I kind of started it after I sort of had my first introduction to activism in the media and pretty much just seeing that the media did not want to see Black asexual people. I did a documentary where everyone in it was white and they were only interested in romantic asexual people. And then I did a documentary after that, specifically to combat that one, to kind of give a more diverse example. And then they cut me out of the televised version and I was the only Black person in it. So I was like, okay, I'm spotting a pattern here with with what you guys want to see. And so I was like, maybe we should just stop relying on like the mainstream media to represent it and sort of kind of diversify the visibility in the online space, especially since so much of asexual communication is largely online. And I think that, you know, when you're kind of scrolling through the websites and you're scrolling through the resources, you see lots of avatars, lots of blocks of text. We don't really see people so much. And I feel like that's almost what kind of feeds into the stereotypes, is that you don't have a lot to picture, so people just kind of go off assumptions. So I was kind of like, let's have something where you can type that in and literally see actual people. And the diversity of the community, not just in the UK and the US, but everywhere, so that it can just kind of expand people's ideas and give the agency back to the community to represent themselves. So that was kind of where it came from. But yeah, so it wasn't really about just like, oh, you can be hot and you can wear lingerie and all that. But I do think that's kind of what people assume it came from.
Is it similar for your aromantic activism? Have you found similar to what you did with asexuality or no?
I feel like there are less visual stereotypes when it comes to being aromantic. I don't think people picture a certain appearance. I think people associate it as more of a lifestyle choice, but they don't have, I guess, just because of the way our culture associates, well, sexuality kind of tends to come first before romantic orientations, just in the way we understand relationships. And then also just because there's always been a long-running media stereotype of, you know, if you're kind of seen as sexually oppressed or sexually unliberated, then you must present yourself in a certain way and be very awkward and be very meek and have all of these other Sheldon Cooper-esque characteristics. Whereas for being aromantic, I think people picture like a wider range of things there. In some instances, probably the opposite. I think people probably think you're so hot that you just can't, like you just have no time. You have, like, you're like, they're just like, oh, I can't stick to one person. I have no time for romance. I just want to hook up. Like people almost kind of picture the opposite.
That makes sense. You consulted on one of like the characters we've spoken about, Sandra Owen, who was in sex education, and you spoke about how O was not only supposed to be asexual but aromantic as well. Can you just speak about the process of consulting on that, like how the character came up versus what you, I guess, had envisioned, and then the audience reception of O?
Yeah, well, that was kind of a confusing one because, I mean, has anyone seen the season? Yeah, lots of hair. Yeah, it was a bit weird, right? It was like it's tonally strange. Like when I was watching, I was like, "What are we trying to say here?" And I was kind of I was supposed to actually work with Netflix for the previous season on like a YouTube thing, which the pandemic kind of got in the way of, like right before we were about to shoot it. It was more of a kind of fashion-related thing with me, Bimini Bunbulas, Jordan Dunn, and Mimi Keen. So I was kind of on Netflix's radar from that, even though we weren't able to do it. And so when they got in touch about this, I was like, yes, finally, like we finally get to do one of the things after it kept kind of getting postponed last time. And they pretty much approached me with the kind of outline of the character, pretty much, like we want an asexual woman of color who's sex positive, and she does a lot of education around asexuality. And I'm like, well, it sounds like me, so I get why you why you came to me for that. And I was like, oh, finally, this is gonna like push the envelope. Like, she's quite like a confident character. She's really got her place within the school. She's really built herself up. Like, she's like, I was very intrigued to kind of bring that to it, especially since, you know, Florence was a scene. And there was a lot of campaigning and effort to get that character for it to only be a scene. And to be fair, the actress wasn't available to do anything else other than that. So that was kind of why that character sort of filtered out. So I was really excited that they were going to bring that to it and that they were actually going to have asexual input in making sure it was good. But yeah, the initial idea was actually she was supposed to be kind of magic initially, which sounds like it would not make sense in the show, and it didn't. So I was kind of like, I don't see how that, but now seeing the season, I'm like, the tone is so bizarre, I could actually almost see how that would make sense. But we were like, I don't think we can have an Asian character and make her mystical. Because her, like, O was initially meant to stand for the Oracle. That was where it came from, because she's supposed to be like this almost mysterious, all-knowing kind of person. And then we were like, no, that's not gonna fit. So then O just became Owen for Sarah Owen. And yeah, I mean, I was kind of given like I would say like the skeleton of it, because there are certain beats that the season had to hit. So despite what people online think, I did not ruin Otis. I had nothing to do with Otis. Otis had his own arc that had to happen. It was always gonna be his messy season, regardless. But she was kind of, so when, in the context of it, when they were like, oh, she's kind of be like going against Otis, I was like, well, if this is his messy moment, that doesn't necessarily make her the antagonist. Because I was like, well, it's important that she's not the bad guy. And that was very much understood in the room. And we kind of put effort into fleshing out certain beats and kind of showing her in a sympathetic way. And I was like, there's no way this could possibly be misconstrued, because, you know, it's like you've had this white guy who's just appeared in the school, seen that she set up this business for herself and said, nah, you can stop that, I'm gonna do it. like, you're not good enough for this, it's gonna be mine. And I was like, well, obviously, everyone's gonna see that he is the problem in this situation. And it was almost, I think, based on what we were going for, I think it was supposed to be almost a commentary on people taking cancel culture in a direction that disproportionately harms minorities, was kind of what the storyline was supposed to be about, because it was supposed to kind of get messier and messier and pettier and pettier. And she, in the end, was supposed to be the one that sort of lost things until it became obvious that he was doing too much, and they sort of resolved it and apologized and everything kind of balanced out. Was supposed to be the arc, but they kind of made some pretty crucial changes that I think really changed the tone of it, like kind of taking the ace-phobia storyline out of it a bit.
Yeah.
There was also quite an important point with Mimi King's character Ruby, the apology part. She was supposed to like apologize, and they were supposed to become friends pretty early on in the season, which didn't really, there was no resolution to that until pretty late, like right near the end, so it didn't really give people much time to kind of like O that much. So there are definitely some like crucial changes, which I didn't see until I got to watch it, because I had to promote it before I got to see it. So that's why there was like a weird juxtaposition between me doing articles being like, this is gonna be so amazing, everyone's gonna love it. And then I like, on the day it came out, I got to tune in and I was like, oh my God, now I get why people are, because I was seeing the reactions, people being like, this is terrible, we wish you didn't exist, we like Isaac better. Which was really unfortunate, not because there's anything wrong with Isaac's character, because I was like, this is the first Asian asexual woman on British TV, and everyone's like, we wish you didn't exist, we prefer the white guys. And I was like, this is not what we were going for. So yeah, seeing those reactions, I was like, I don't understand what the issue is. And it wasn't until I was watching, I was like, oh my God, they swapped some things. And I think that they had to make some changes because it wasn't meant to be the last season. I think that it was quite late in the process when they were like, we're not doing another one, so we've got to wrap this up quickly. And you can't have the main character's last season be his messy season. Like, you can't have him being a dick the whole time. So they kind of had to make her look worse so he could kind of have a happy ending, because she was a new character and he's pretty established. So yeah, I feel like there were a lot of behind the scenes things that impacted where a lot of the storylines kind of ended up going.
And I was quite curious. I feel like some things might have been lost in translation, some of the nuances, because I did not hate O, like, because I understood O, you know? But I felt like, oh, is it because I was also quite curious of the reception from like audiences who are ace versus like people who are alloasexual. I was like, do you get the nuance? Because I don't know if you guys, for everyone who watched, there was the scene where O kind of turns on, like, and the scene where O turns into a bully, because she turns and exposes the secret of like, oh yeah, she wets the bed. And I think people didn't understand why she would do that, because it seemed quite drastic.
Because they cut out.
Yeah, because they did cut out. But I understood why she would do that, because I was like, this situation is making O uncomfortable, being put in a situation where she has to like speak and like being pressured to be like sexual, like what have you done? So I understood that, which is why I guess I knew the fullness of the character. And I was like, that's where the little things are lost. And with asexual characters, I feel like we're still in an era of like, you kind of have to explain what asexuality is, and you have to like spoon feed and give like baby steps, which is why maybe probably people were like, no, O is not a good person. But I completely understood where O was coming from.
Yeah, I think that there were, I mean, they still had like, I don't know if people spotted like the ace ring, like in like the first episode, like some people, when it came to the kind of coming out scene, they're like, oh, they just threw that in out of nowhere. It's like, no, that was part of the arc. I think it just sort of got, maybe it was a bit too subtle, I think, because they kind of removed some things. And I think, and it's funny because I think the reason why they specifically included that scene of them being literally like 10 years old or like 8, like they were so little in that scene. It was supposed to be an example of how far back are we going to go to judge people's entire character based on something they did when they were literally in primary school. But I think that because of the way our culture is right now, people were like, judge her based on things she did in primary school. And the message kind of got a bit confused. And I also think that, you know, we're spotting the nuances in it and we're kind of seeing like some of the details. But I think, again, it was a predominantly white audience. And a lot of people, like some of the criticisms were just, I don't like her face. I don't like her expressions. She seems suspicious to me. And it's like, is her face, her smile, the look in her eyes, is like, it's reading microaggression to me. Like, I feel like some people were just like, this isn't like, we want a Liv from Emmerdale, we want a Florence, we want like just a white girl being awkward and being like, and that would be kind of a bit more palatable than someone who's like, no, I'm sticking my ground. If you're going to try and take everything from me, I'm going to give it right back to you. And yeah, I feel like there were just multiple things that sort of got people's backs up. And also just the tone of the season, I think, was so, like, the school was so almost utopian and almost like, the vibe was so strange that I feel like immediately when you have a whole new setting on a show and a whole new bunch of characters, I think people are immediately like, this isn't what I wanted in the season. I don't know if I like these new people. And I think they did kind of create a weird air around her, which I think was kind of fed into just by the way the season was in general, which I think kind of hindered people's reactions. I think if she had just joined the old school and everything was set in the old school, I think it would have had a slightly different reception.
Makes sense. But that's basically sets the tone of media representation, how people see asexual people and why. With race, it's also like quite key to mention some of these things are like how, like, let's say Black people are seen in general. Black people are over-sexualized. Black people are thought to be hypersexual and, you know, sexual beings. So you're not automatically going to be thought of like, oh, you have this nuance, you know. I think with race, like race assigns certain characteristics to specific races, where whiteness affords you possibility to be like, this is this. When you're Black, you're like, oh, you're already like hypersexual. So there's lots of like historical stuff behind it as well that ties in, which is why I guess makes it difficult, aside from the media, to sort of like claim those identities. And I guess that's where we're going, like beyond media representation, to discuss why other stuff in the media, medical stuff at work. I think because with your report with Stonewall, it showed that asexual people are less likely to come out. And I think if you speak to asexual people, you're like, there's anxiety around speaking about being asexual, being aromantic, because, you know, you are kind of having to explain this identity. And I feel like with asexual people, it's like, people are waiting to debunk asexuality and be like, no, like you trying to like kind of cut you out, like, no, you can't be asexual. So there's a lot of pressure on that. Can you speak about the work you've done outside of media representation to, you know, further initiatives and rights for asexual and aromantic people?
Yeah, I mean, I think when people kind of hear the word representation, they always immediately go to media. And I know, I've noticed within the asexual community, media is always like the #1 conversation. When people like, I want to see myself in something, they always mean a TV show. And that is helpful, don't get me wrong. But it's like, in observing the current like landscape in this country and, you know, looking at like the trans community, for example, it's like, what comes after the awareness? What happens when everybody knows about you? We see what happens next. And it's like, there's literally nothing in place for what comes after that. There is no legislative recognition. There are no protections, not in hate crime law, not in the Equality Act. Asexuality is still a medicalized orientation. There's been efforts to change that for other identities, but not for us. And I just didn't really feel like that was a conversation that was happening in a sort of strategic way, even though within asexual spaces, people would always give examples. And I'd heard of medical discrimination since like, I think I first heard about it for asexual people in 2018. Like, it's been something people talk about amongst themselves, but it doesn't seem to really go anywhere else. And that was why I pretty much approached Stonewall with a long list of grievances and was like, so what are we going to do about that? And that was kind of what led to us starting the Stonewall Yasmin Benoit AIDS project. And the first thing we wanted to do was get research out there, qualitative research, building upon the statistics that the Government Equalities Office found back in 2018, which no one really noticed, which was specifically about asexual people having higher conversion therapy rates and lower life satisfaction and being more likely to experience discrimination in healthcare and in the workplace. And so we kind of wanted to get more information into that, see how it manifests, see where there's areas for intervention. So that was the ACE in the UK report that we released in October. And right now we're kind of in the distribution phase of it. I've been, like this month, I've been speaking to a lot of MPs across different parties. Haven't got to Conservative yet. They've been less responsive to my emails. But like Lib Dems, SMP, Labor, and there has actually been like quite a lot of like positive interest there in recognizing asexuality in legislation, especially since hopefully we're heading towards a Labor government soon. And I was just the day before yesterday, I was speaking at the NHS's LGBT conference and speaking to people from government and healthcare leaders about the medicalization of asexuality. And there's definitely a lot of interest in doing something about that. So that's kind of been my thing for the start of this year, has just been trying to get that in front of the right people and increase representation in the legislative sense, as well as in kind of like the more obvious like media sense.
And to give everyone kind of an idea of where numbers are, stats and laws and everything. I think in 2021, there was an England and Wales census which recorded that about 28,000 people who identify as asexual. But then, and then in terms of laws, in 2002, New York passed a Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act, which was one of the only pieces of legislation in the world that specifically mentioned asexuality amongst protected sex orientations, until another one was passed in 2023 in Tasmania, when it was the first state in Australia to officially recognize asexual, aromantic, and agender people. So honestly, there's like really nothing in place. And I think another interesting thing to speak about that is in queer spaces as well. I suppose asexual and aromantic people feel that because you may pass as straight, there's this anxiety and fear. I know I've seen these people, asexual people, who come and say that there's this fears of like, oh, but you're like a straight person, or like you're like just trying to get, but asexual people experience their own form of discrimination, and it's not about like stepping on anyone's toes. I guess, can you speak about maybe your experience with that in terms of queer spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's funny because I feel like I never passed as straight. People always thought I was gay. Like if you're a woman that's not sexually attracted to men, the instinct usually is that you're a lesbian.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like what I always had, was people just sort of assumed I was gay. So yeah, I feel like I've never really had much of a heteronormative experience in that sense. Like I started going to Pride when I was 14. I've gone pretty much every year since then, and lots of my work has always been within queer spaces. And but it's funny because like I will do the work, I'll do the things, and then it's only when I say I did them when people are like, how dare you? What made you think you could go there? And it's like, well, my invitation? I don't know. I didn't just like force my way in. I think people that kind of see asexuality as taking up space there literally think that I'm like pushing myself into the room, kicking a lesbian to the ground and snatching the mic, whereas it's actually a lot more like civil. Like on the most part, people are pretty like open to asexuality being there, and they've just been sort of like looking for more ways to do that. But online, the vibe is like completely different, and I think that's quite a shame because lots of people don't have in real life access to those spaces. And I know lots of asexual people, they see things online and they think, oh, I'm never going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be welcome there. Like, look at all of this hate. But it is very much an online thing. Like, I've only had a few incidences in person in all this time. But yeah, I feel like it's interesting because there is still like an equal lack of awareness within like queer spaces. I think you would assume that they would have more awareness because it's like in the acronym. But asexuality is still something that people are just discovering and just noticing there as well. I mean, I only know like the basics of it, but I guess for me, partially, I don't really include asexuality in my entertainment that much because it consumes a lot of my life anyway. And and I don't know, I feel like I've just seen, again, maybe I'm just a little bit jaded of having, I don't know, so many white romantic asexual narratives that it doesn't like jump at me as like, oh my gosh, I must see another one. It's like I feel like I'm kind of surrounded by that all the time, so I wasn't like immediately drawn to it, but it did then lead to us being able to do this because you were like, okay, I'm seeing the vibe here, let's switch it, which I appreciate. But yeah, I haven't actually seen it, and I'm not, and I think it's not in English, and I'm not good at reading subtitles, so I don't know if I'll be rushing to see that one. But I'm glad that other people felt like it was like they saw themselves in it. Yeah,
it's a Lithuanian film, and for me, when I had about Slow, came across Slow programming wise. In my time as a programmer, which hasn't been that long, I haven't found, like, there's barely any asexual features feature-length films. I think there's I Am What I Am, which I had spoken about, which I haven't watched, which I came across in my research. There's also it's a film with a character called Levi, called Something in the Dirt, where he mentions, again, something like about being asexual. There's two others, which I don't, as I mentioned, if someone, I don't like to go off like throwaway comments of like, yeah, I would see this person on the A spectrum and like, no. And there's some, you know, with asexual characters, it can be a weird thing where like, I see them as asexual because they act this way, or like, you know, I shy away from, or they're put into an asexual spectrum because of like a medical thing they have that we're like, I'm trying to afford. So that's why I mentioned only these 3 films. So with Slow, when I watched it and I saw it, I thought I have to have this film on the program. It's feature length. Usually asexual characters are in a short film. They're like a side character. This put like Dovidas, who is the asexual character, he was the lead. It was central to the storyline. I thought the film was beautiful. I loved it so much. I thought it was like sensual. There's a lot of movement. There was like dance. There was physical touch, which is another thing that people think, oh, asexual people don't want to indulge in, like maybe like, yeah, we can hug people, or like we enjoy dancing, or, you know, all of those things. So I thought it was a representation that was not, it wasn't something similar to what I've seen in like even the representations I've shown you. And then within the film itself, how Dovidas is going through those challenges with Elena, of having to explain again and again, and having to maybe like compromise on his asexuality. I don't know if I should spoil the, I mean, at this point, it's like you both screenings have been at Flare, but I thought the ending was quite fitting for him because I didn't want for him to have to compromise on his asexuality. And I thought, yeah, it's good that they part ways, because like, it's just not understanding someone, like not understanding this asexuality, and he needs to go and find someone who does, because it was getting toxic in that sense to me, that, okay, we're not like at a meeting point where we're understanding each other. I don't think Elena is like bad or like a bad character or anything, but yeah, I just think it was quite accurate and stuff. Like also at the beginning, I don't know if I had mentioned how I think asexual people are able to quite clearly understand the differences between, you know, sexual attraction, libido, and like sex, the act itself, and romantic attraction, which I feel like other people are not able, they might lump into one and make it all a blurry thing. The scenes where Dovidas was like, Elena got mad at Dovidas for like masturbating, and it's like, I thought you were asexual. And I was like, what does this have to do with anything, you know? So it's just stuff like that, which again, the questions of like, I don't know if those are things asexual audiences might be like, yeah, it's obvious, like this doesn't mean he's not asexual, but it's not translating to other people. But yeah, I just thought it captured quite a lot of the difficulties in communication. I thought the relationship was beautiful, how they related with each other, and yeah.
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's awareness, but I also think that it's just like a lack of creativity in like the media, particularly in like fictional media in general. I mean, a lot of our media, regardless of your sexual orientation, is largely centered around sex and relationships, and the storylines tend to center around those, especially through the kind of a lens of like coming of age and self-discovery, which is why most asexual characters are teenagers. So I think that people just don't really know what else to show, like unless you're in like a very specific genre that's like horror or crime, where the storyline is centered around a specific incident or something that's kind of unrelated to the characters' actual like personalities and stuff. It's people don't really know how to have a long running storyline about that, which is then kind of interesting, because then when you have examples of asexual characters who, you know, their asexuality might come up just for a little bit and then they just continue with other storylines, people don't like that either, because they're like, oh, well, asexuality isn't in it very much. It's like, that's because it's not their whole being, but then people want to see it be their whole being. But let's be honest, that's not that interesting for that long to have that just be all a character is and all they're talking about. So I think there's kind of like a complexity there, and also people don't really know where to start and they're afraid of getting it wrong, so they would rather just like not do it. which I think also comes down to people not really consulting asexual people about what they want to hear. Like, I've also done a lot of work in advertising, not just in it, but with advertising companies. I was speaking, there was a campaign that was being planned not so long ago. And it was an asexual inclusive campaign. And I was like, oh, that's so cool they mentioned it. But their message of the overall campaign is that sex is fundamental to your health. And I was like, you didn't speak to anyone asexual, did you? So yeah, I don't think that campaign is coming to be anymore. But it's like, again, I use that as an example because it's like people don't really know, again, like that much about it. Even if they do have the right intentions, they might not have the time or the interest or the awareness of the nuances to think about how to do it properly. So they kind of just do it as a throwaway thing. And also you kind of have to pitch things to people. And even if you think it's a great idea, other people might be like, not enough people are going to get this. This is only going to appeal to a very small particular demographic, and we need advertising revenue, so a lot of people have to be tuning in. And there's such an I think, saturation of shows and stuff nowadays, that even when things do exist, they don't have the longevity that they used to have. Yeah. So yeah, I think that there's like lots of layers to it. But I think also, especially in things like advertising, short form things, if you want to represent like a gay character, have the guy kiss the guy, there you go, people gather the gist. For asexuality, it's a bit harder to just like show that in a short thing without it ending up being a bit of a TED Talk, which may or may not be that interesting for an audience. So yeah, it is a complicated one, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. I think the consultation of like asexual people is quite a big one as well. And in general, how asexuality is viewed by society at large, I think really influences what's in the media. I think my first ever, and at the time I guess it had no real significance to me, but the first ever scene I saw or remember seeing was in the TV show House. Where there was this couple who was like, oh, it's an asexual couple, but then, oh no, the husband has like a brain issue and the wife was pretending. And like, that's what society thinks, and that's what society thought at the time. So I think that's like, it kind of shifts the more society shifts and the more like people become aware of it. But I think at the center of this really has to be asexual people, because those nuances are like lost otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's kind of been just like the story of my life in terms of pretty much everything I've done. I feel like I'm kind of in the firing line for things. If anyone has any kind of grievance or any kind of skepticism about asexuality, it will be my problem. It's interesting you mentioned the girl guys thing, because I remember when that happened, they did their tweet saying, Happy International Asexuality Day. People then were like, wait, asexuality, sex, girl, guides, sex, children, bad. And then saw me as one of the people that co-founded International Asexuality Day and thought, Yasmin, lingerie, sex, talking about sex to children, we don't like her. Next thing you know, I get a phone call from Good Morning Britain saying, we need to talk to you about asexuality and telling that to children and talking about pitching this kind of stuff to children. And it ended up getting canned like 5 seconds before we were supposed to go on air, which is probably a blessing. But yeah, so things do tend to blow up in my face in particular, and they do tend to, and the more people are aware, the more negative reactions there are, particularly if I'm the one delivering the message. People particularly don't like it if I say things, I've noticed, which is why I kind of started putting all the effort into the legislation and into the kind of more serious stuff, because I was like, this is where it's going. We literally have the trans community as an example of what happens when people become more aware of something. I think some people have like a more utopian idea where it's like, okay, everyone's gonna know about what asexuality is. Everyone's gonna understand, everyone's gonna accept us, and everything's gonna be fine. It's like, that's not how that's gonna go. And we've seen the rise in conspiracy theories, particularly since I started working with Stonewall, that Stonewall has created transgender children through puberty blockers and made a generation of people asexual. So now they've had to make up a new orientation to justify what they did. And that's why we have an initiative, so that we can normalize the damage that we have caused of our army of transgender children. And these are very, like, this has been printed, this was on GB News multiple times, like, this has been in Spikes, this has been a conversation within the media that is growing more prevalent. So yeah, there's definitely, and there's gonna be more of that. That is just what's gonna happen. But it's also like, I don't know, will people rather just stay in the shadows, or do you want people to know? I feel like it is kind of happen inevitably. I think asexuality's been on the fringes of conversation for about 100 years, or more than that, probably like late 1800s, I would say. So I feel like, yeah, it's kind of just like an inevitable thing, but fortunately I have a pretty thick skin, and unfortunately I do have to encourage people to also develop one, because it's gonna get worse before it gets better, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know, as you said, asexuality is like, just because, oh, new word, language, I feel like people need to view language as something that like grows, changes, evolves. Just because like words are new and you find a word to describe something doesn't mean the thing wasn't there before. And this is stuff that like all queer people have always like faced suspicion of, oh no, look at what you're doing to the kids. But at the end of the day, it's like, you kind of have to make that decision for yourself. You can't live for other people. You can't like, because you have as much right to take up as much space and room as you wish to. And that's kind of the goal of this, to like be comfortable, take up that space, make sure you're taking up this space and you're safe to do so. So yeah, that's the goal and the hope.
I think that, you know, if it's any comfort, we all die alone, technically. So you could be married, like, regardless. I mean, you're not going to take everybody with, like, you know, technically we all die alone regardless. And, you know, you could be having sex every 10 minutes, be married, and be sitting in a care home with your significant other, and you might still die alone, or they're going to die first, or, you know, I feel like it. And also, you know, look around at all the allosexual people. Most marriages end in divorce, like, not to be a downer, but they do. And they're not all amicable. Most people spend lots of their romantic relationships trying to maintain them, or like, it's not necessarily like, okay, if I wasn't asexual, this would be a sure thing. I would have companionship for life. Like, that's what most allosexual people are striving for. And it's pretty impossible, realistic. Like, very few people actually have that. I think all you can really look to do in life is just to build companionship that might not be eternal, it might not last forever, but that's why you meet new people and you form new connections, and there'll probably be a point where most of your friends die and you'll be old and you're going to outlive people, and then you're going to have to make new friends with the other person in the care home. And, you know, it's like, realistically, that's kind of how it's probably going to go. So I think that, you know, I think everyone could kind of do with sort of just like taking off this pressure of like, the ultimate goal is that you're going to kind of have this eternal thing that's going to be perfect all the way through, and that sex is the only way of unlocking that. Because also, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some very sexually active, very old people. That is a thing. I have heard statistically, and from people that work in care homes, they're still going for it. But also for lots of people that becomes increasingly less relevant. And there's, you know, there's certain age groups, like, you know, I kind of look at like my mom's, but lots of people have kind of, they've done the marriage thing, they've done the kids thing, and now kids have flown the nest, the divorces have happened, and now they're in a whole different phase. And I think that maybe when you're kind of in this phase of life, it feels more like that's what everyone's focused on. But I think the older you get, it kind of becomes less relevant, and you have like more freedom to do different things. So yeah, I think, I mean, it's a valid concern. Lots of people worry about getting old and dying alone, but I think we should also come to terms with we probably all will. And there's lots of like fun things that happen before that, and lots of other things that you can do that sex is not gonna activate. There are people having loads of sex and they're still lonely. So it's not like a guarantee in any way.
Yeah. Also, I'd like to add, like, I think we live in a world that really upholds romantic relationships and romantic connections as the end-all be-all. It's like what's put on a pedestal and everything else falls away. You know, this is why you have like problems where people are like, oh my gosh, their friends get into relationships and they stop talking to them, or like they stop. I personally have always held like my platonic relationships to such a high standard. I compare everything else to them. I'm usually like, if I am like in anything else, anything that's romantic, I'm like, if my friends do this for me, like I just consider like I have such good friends. If my friends would be like, do you compare to my friends? Would I be your friend? That's my standard. Like if I would not be your friend, I don't think you should be anywhere in my life. For me, I always view it as like, I don't want to view things as from an individualistic sense. I view things very communal based, and how I even imagine my future, envision my future. I never tie myself to like personally, oh, this is how like I'll end up alone with someone or this. But I look forward to building community like with my friends, because even consider like with married people, you need someone to take care of your kids. You need someone to help you rest. You need someone to laugh with. You can't always be with your partner. So they invest completely in other relationships and hold them to the same regard as you would romantic relationships. So yeah, because romance is not everything. Like friends are like amazing. So yeah, like build community there, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've already mentioned one, the LGBTQ Center. I feel like you should look, well, on meetup.com, people do meetups at various times, like outside of centers and stuff. And also around Pride, there's always like an asexual group in most Prides. Like I'm from Reading, our local Pride, the asexuals come out. London Pride, there's always the asexual, usually Avon does it. So yeah, that's kind of one of the other times where people are kind of in person together, but there is a severe lack of in-person things. I often find that when I do events like this is like, there'll always be people like, this is the first time I've seen so many asexual people. This is the only time we get to kind of meet in real life. But yeah, I wish I could give more examples of in-person things, but those are kind of the only ones.
I feel like we are kind of, you can go into the world thinking, oh my God, you're the only one. Because I mean, that's kind of like, you know, but honestly, the amount of like queer, like lesbians, trans people I know I've met who are asexual on the asexual spectrum. There's also lots of platonic spaces, which like you will meet asexual people over there. So that's why I think it's just kind of a myth what is being like you know, there's so much variety in people who are ace, and I think we are kind of scared to like say you're ace because you don't know. There's some fear in like what the reception of that will be, but you will find us, we're there. You know me now. I'm actually with my friend, my other programmer, Rihanna, we're running an event on friendship, and it's like that space to have that. We wanted to like have, we've invited all sorts of different like community groups who meet up. So yeah, come to that. You will obviously see other ace people there. So yeah.
I think with the queer community, there's so much intersectionality that I think is just often missed in general. I think people do have a sort of monolithic approach to things when the experiences between every single letter is different. Then you take in other factors like race or religion or culture and language. And I think that people kind of get very just sort of stuck on having the same conversations or representing the same people or kind of focusing on very specific messages. And that's why often when pretty much all the time when I do something, they're always like, oh, this is the first time we've done anything on asexuality and we've existed for 50 years. And it's like, and you've been saying LGBTQIA+ all this time, you never went beyond the Q at all this time. So it's like, it's wild to me that no one thought of that like in all this time. So I kind of just wish that people would take the initiative of being like, just so focused on like the first two usually letters. And then more recently, people are kind of like, oh, there's a B. And then they're kind of like, oh, we should probably do something around the T because lots of people are talking about the T. And then it does not get beyond that at all. Yeah, so I kind of wish that people would expand that and also expand that conversation away from just the awareness, the 101. Like I have started saying to places this year, I'm not having just that conversation anymore. Like it's not 2016. We don't need to be doing asexuality means this and that's it. It's like I feel like we need to kind of take it a bit further. And you know, for example, with the campaign to ban conversion therapy, which I've been very involved in, when trans and non-binary people were excluded from that, lots of people were upset about that. There was lots of conversation about that. Asexuality was excluded as well, and no one was really talking about that. And the information was right there. next to the other thing and nobody noticed. And it's like, I wish people would just take it like one step further, like it's right there. It would not take that much to expand that conversation and to include asexual people in the conversation. And I think that that would just benefit like the kind of movement in general. So yeah, that's what I kind of wish for, is that people would just think about it a bit more, because it's not like we have all the tools, like we already have the mindset down, like the resources are there or in the same spaces. It's just a lack of energy or a lack of interest, I think.
I think for me, I don't know, queer spaces sometimes can be very like sexualized. So it's good to like take into account asexuality and aromanticism and the fact that some people, that's not their way of approaching things. And then, I don't know, I guess, as you said, like going beyond, sometimes I feel the fear that asexual people have is that it has to come from you. You're the one who starts the conversation. It would be good if like other people started the conversation, because then it would make you more comfortable to feel like, okay, like I'm here, I can belong here. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like just taking that into account, because that's another thing about like being queer, not conflating being queer with being like sexual. Not same thing with the race thing. It doesn't, one is not equal to the other. So yeah.
Yeah, I do literally everything myself. Everything I've managed to achieve, I have done it pretty single-handedly. I mean, some things just appear, like when they said, will you be Grand Marshal for New York Pride? That kind of came out of nowhere. But most things, like I've talked my way into Vogue. I talked my way into Stonewall. I have to really, like, especially, again, when we say the unlikely face, I am not what people necessarily want to see. I have to fight for everything. And even when I get the thing, I'm always so wary of doing like group articles, for example, because if I do something and I'm in proximity to white asexual people, I won't be in it to this day. That's an ongoing problem I have, where I'm like, oh, cool, so I'm just this bit, despite all the things I've done, but everyone else gets the bigger section. So I really have to, it's a lot of effort. And I mean, you kind of get to see the fun parts, like me doing talks or me being in places, but most of the time it's just me at 4 a.m. firing out emails for people to be like, either ignore me or be like, we don't need to do that, or, oh, thanks, we'll get someone else to do it. It's pretty much how things usually go. So yeah, I have no, and I've looked for, like I'm considering how much I've managed to do, you would think that there would be people that would want to like work with me or help out in that aspect, but every company, every agency, they're always like, we don't get it. There's no audience for that. It's a no. Even though, so I just take their clients and work there anyway. Because it's like, well, they were interested. You just didn't believe they would be. So yeah, my process is very just like throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, and plant a lot of seeds and see what grows. And it usually takes a long time to start to see things come to fruition. And that's why like it does take up like so much of my time, like all my time trying to get things to happen. And then regardless of whether people notice, whether people like it or not, I feel like in the long run it will make a difference. So it's a complicated process, especially when there's no blueprint. Like I can't say, oh, well, I saw this person do these things, so I'll just copy what they did. It's like there's no one to really look at who's doing it the way I'm doing it, which leaves room for creative freedom. But then it's also like, I'll have people message me and be like, literally, how are you going to change the world today? What are you going to do about this? And I'm like, I don't know. What would you do? How am I supposed to know? I don't know. But then I'm like, oh God, I need to find a way to make that happen, or people are going to be disappointed, because if I don't do it, I don't know if anyone else is going to do it. So I kind of feel like I have to do everything. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but yeah, it's a weird process.
I had like one last slide to give you guys resources and stuff. Yasmin's report is going to be in there, the Stonewall report, which I think everyone should go and look at. It has like very helpful stats. I think they also do give recommendations in there. I put in the book by Sharon about like being Black and asexual. There's also Ace, which is written by Angela Chan, so it's from an Asian perspective. And there's this old article for Lovers and Fighters by Dean Spade. So it's just like people who are kind of like trying to challenge this idea that you have to be sexual or romantic in the world. also happy for anyone else to share the resources. It's not an exhaustive list. There's also loads of fictional books, actually, which have asexual and aromantic characters. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. I was so nervous to put this on because I was also like, oh my God, do people want to come and like listen to a talk about asexuality and aromanticism? But I'm so happy and honored and glad to see all of you here. And yeah, I hope you all have good afternoon, evenings. Thank you for coming, Yasmin.
Thank you. Glad to be here.